All right, we begin the conversations this morning in South Africa. After more than a month of consistent power cuts across the South Africa region, the country's economic hub now finds itself in the middle of water crisis with water restrictions. Now, the water restrictions have been introduced in all three metros that make up the Gauteng province, which includes the world-class city Johannesburg. They come after the city of Johannesburg and its surroundings experienced a critically low supply of water amid repeated power failures at the water facility.
The province's water utility has requested customers to only use water for basic household needs. Joining us now to give us more insights on the water issue is Professor Mike Muller, who's also the former Director General of the South African Department of Water. Professor, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Morning to you and to your viewers.
All right. Help us understand what are the reasons for these restrictions and how do they link to the power outages?
Okay, the water is a complicated business, as you know. Electricity we can control because, man and women produce it, but electricity we depend on, water we depend on higher powers. So we are in a situation at the moment in Johannesburg and the surrounding province where we've got very full dams. We've got enough water in the dams to see us through for 5 years. But because we're always worried about a drought, we reserve how much water can be taken out of those dams. And what's happening is we've had some very hot weather, we have late rains, we have power cuts which are aggravating the situation. And so water consumption has gone up, but the amount of water that the Rand Water, our big utility organization, is allowed to take out of the river, the consumption has exceeded the demand. And that has meant there have been restrictions put in place, which has inconvenienced rather a lot of people. It's not that we've run out of water, we're trying to maintain enough water so that we don't run out of water. But people find that difficult to understand.
Well, you say that you have not run out of water and that you're trying to maintain the water that's available to prevent potential, droughts in the future. But some South Africans do not agree. There have been complaints and general reactions on social media. They've said that there is a water crisis and that it's becoming increasingly difficult to live and to survive. In fact, one tweet did actually state that the person said that he was becoming unpatriotic day in, day out because on one hand, they're talking about load shedding, cable theft, and now water restrictions. Can you categorically say that there is no water crisis in South Africa? And what do you say to the South Africans who are genuinely worried and expressing concern, especially on social media?
Yeah, I agree with you. If you don't have water in your home, it's a crisis. And because of the power cuts, there are local areas where there's maybe a water tower in a suburb, and that tower needs to be fed by electricity. The electricity is cut, and then there's not enough water around in that suburb. So that's a crisis for the people there. But we've always got to distinguish, is there a big crisis or is there a little crisis? And what we've got is a situation where there are areas which have been cut because of power cuts. They're relatively small, but that doesn't help the people who are suffering. But the bigger problem is, are we going to have enough water to see, Johannesburg, Kurleni, Tshwane, Pretoria, the capital, the surrounding towns and cities outside of this province? We've got to make sure that they have enough water, in case there's a drought. And that's a balancing act. What is clear is that the communication about what the problems are has not been very good. And so yesterday what we had was the minister called all the parties together and said, get into one room, work together, tell people what's happening. Where there are particular problems, make sure they get fixed quickly. And I think that's actually probably the most important intervention so far. Because if you don't tell people what's happening, you get panic, you get rumors, you get a little problem is blown up and turned into a national crisis. And, we need to manage that. Communication is actually one of the most important ways of managing water. And it hasn't been very good so far.
Well, now you just mentioned, a national crisis. I probably would start from there and then would end talking about the approval rating of the South African government in general. Yeah. I'm going to quickly share a tweet from someone here. It says, South Africa is currently the closest it's ever been to a full-on countrywide riot if the water reservoirs in Johannesburg aren't filled within 2 weeks, and if more reservoirs are lost, Johannesburg will fall. I'm not sure who this person is, but I just saw that. I'm trying to understand if you also agree that the situation is that bad among citizens. And also the criticism being leveled at the government at the moment, particularly from citizens. As a former Director General in the Department of Water, would you say that these criticisms are legit and the approval ratings for the South African government right now is maybe at the lowest that it probably has been in a while?
Yeah, okay. I think, we must be careful about imagining that Twitter tells us what's happening. It's very useful just to get a sense of emotions, but it doesn't tell us what's happening, number one. Number two, quite recently, there was a survey done in Gauteng province, which is where Johannesburg is. Which are the services that people are unhappy with and which are they happy with? I was actually surprised because water came out with 80% of people saying we're happy with our water. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. So, there are all sorts of problems in South Africa and the electricity is driving people crazy. What's happening in the water actually is interesting because the electricity failure occurred because there was simply not enough new capacity built to supply the demand. And what's happening in water is that the capacity is being managed to make sure that there is capacity in, going forward. And what we are worried about at the moment, those, where we manage the water, and I engage quite a lot still with the sector, what we're worried about is can we reduce the wastage that is happening in the system? Because that wastage, we can probably save 20% of the water, will take us through for the next few years. And there is a new project being built, which will increase the amount of water available for the whole region. So what our challenge is to get through the next 3 or 4 years without having a major shortage. And keeping control of how much gets taken out of the system is actually the first step. So on the one hand, it looks terrible, and certainly there's a lot of noise on social media, and correctly so. If I don't have water, I will be very cross. But if you look at the big picture, actually it's being done right. The communication has been very, very weak. There's, and we're seeing some efforts to sort that out. But the combination of poor communication and then some areas where there are problems because of the load shedding, the shortage of electricity for pumping, that is causing a bit of a storm. And it's going to rain shortly. And, as soon as it rains, the people will stop watering gardens, the demand will go down, and we'll be back to something like normal. But that'll be a week or so still.
I think the question now we should ask is, what does it look like in the nearest future for the people of South Africa? Is it something that South Africans should be worried about, that might be a recurring problem? And would you say that there were things that could have been done to ensure that we had more than enough, as opposed to being rationing the water, which is what is happening now?
Yeah, first of all, we shouldn't talk about all of South Africa because South Africa has lots of different water systems and there are problems all over. Because water supply is a local government responsibility, and where.
All right, we seem to have a slight challenge with connection with Professor Muller there. The conversation, really is about the water challenge in South Africa, and if we can connect on a later date, we will, of course, bring back Professor Muller. The conversations, from South Africa at this time, are not the brightest, and that's why I also spoke about the approval rating of the government at this time, because these are some of the most basic amenities, and those are electricity and water. And of course, earlier in the news, we spoke about security challenges with 549 kids, being killed.
And that's not also excluding conversations about the safety of women. So that's
Absolutely.
something that's in the front burner.